Okay, very early it refers to a place,
Oh.
which is a region of the Greek world, not the Greek mainland, but it encompassed really above all the island of Lesbos, where the two really famous lyric poets of the 8th century were reputed to have lived. There aren't the kind of historical records that we would really like to know about the real lives of Sappho and Alcaeus, who were those two poets. But Horace's favorite meter that I keep going on and on about, that he uses for all 6 of those Roman odes at the beginning of Book 3, that's the Alcaeic stanza, because it's associated and may have been invented by that actual guy, Alcaeus, who came from the island of Lesbos, which was the preeminent place in the region of Greece that was called Aeolia. So if you think of, this is Turkey, and I'm just horrible at this. This is Greece. Crete's down here. Okay, so this region was the most important region in the rebirth of Greek culture in the 7th to 6th century BCE. Anybody know what that's called? That's not Aeolia.
Oh, that's Ilium? That's Ilium.
Well, Ilium is, I mean,
I was just thinking.
is Ilium Troy, is Ilium not Troy? But Ilium was definitely a place that some people thought was Troy up here, but which was very close to this region where Homer, the Homeric epics, were coming out. This is called Ionia.
Oh, that's what
And as far as we can tell, Ionia recolonizes Greece by founding Athens at a certain very important point, probably in the 8th century BCE. This is after this absolute collapse of Mycenaean civilization, which led to a dark age. We don't really still know how that happened. But it gets reborn from what we think of as Turkey, but they usually just called it Asia. But then later, when people realized that Asia was really big, they called it Anatolia. Yeah, Anatolia is in here. Asia Minor is what it came to be called. And then this region, and Lesbos is like that big. People don't think of it as being all that big. Like it's nowhere near as big as Crete, but it's still quite big. It has 2 principal cities on it, and this is the region that is called Aeolia. And it is the region that, because of Sappho and Alcaeus, is thought to be kind of the birthplace of the kind of lyric poetry with the dum-ba-ba-bum, dum-ba-ba-bum, dum-ba-ba-bum choriam thing. I'll write that up just because I had my marker. Okay. Even go like that. Long, short, long. Sappho and Alcaeus and their followers came up with this awesome poetry that would eventually be called lyric poetry. And the Greeks ate it up for centuries and centuries. And so when the Library of Alexandria is founded and they kind of codify who the greatest poets and poetesses were, Sappho and Alcaeus end up like just under Homer. Then they think of Homer as somebody who wrote down his poetry because they completely lost any idea of the fact that it was once an oral tradition. So they basically go Homer, sometimes Archilochus, who's another lyric poet who writes in a different kind of meter that Horace never writes in. So Homer, Sappho, Alcaeus, lyric poets almost as good as epic poets. And so what does Virgil do? I know I just like threw that.
The hexameter?
Yes, right. So Homer composes, the Homeric bards really, composed in dactylic hexameter. Dum bum 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 bum. Musa moyenepem andra moyenepem musa pollutra pon hos malapola. The first line of the Odyssey. It's really well suited to Greek. A few people before Virgil tried to do it in Latin, but Virgil is the one who does the real Roman epic, really kind of like tames the dactylic hexameter into Latin. Arma virumque cano, Troiae qui primus aboris, the first line of the Aeneid. So Virgil, 20 years older than Horace, has taken Ionian song and put it into Italian verse. Now Horace Yeah. So that Horace is saying, I did the same thing. And so he's not only saying my monument's going to be great, but he's implying very, very strongly that Virgil's monument is just as great. The question of whether Horace's is better or Virgil's is better, or whether they're equal, is kind of the one that he leaves open. But what he's saying is that this thing that we're doing, this cultural thing where we take the best poetry in the world, and poetry and music and drama are all one big thing. They're all the domain of the muses. You could even say that history and philosophy are part of the same thing because they're all inspired by the kind of musical impulse that, at least traditionally, the Greeks, whose knowledge then came down to the Romans, thought were all connected in terms of basically divine inspiration. So when he comes down to talk to Melpomene, who's Melpomene?
Is she even muse of comedy?
It varies. She's definitely not the muse of comedy, but the question of which muses are muses of what is always open. But she is, to the extent that the muses have special functions, she is the muse of lyric poetry. Her name means singing. And the muse of epic poetry, on the other hand, Calliope, and the muse of history, just so we're finishing this out, Clio. Yeah. So Melpomene, take pride in what has been earned by your merit, and muse, that's Melpomene again, willingly crown my hair with a Delphic laurel. Who is Delphi sacred to?
Apollo.
Yeah. And his chorus, the muses, and above Delphi rises Parnassus, where they hung out, according to the myth. So the Delphic laurel is suitable for anybody who's doing song and poetry, anything inspired by that kind of artistic spirit. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to remember that despite the fact that Horace at the beginning of Book 3 says, I'm doing something new, and despite the fact that he says, I'm doing something that's going to last longer than anything else, it's all Greek, right? He's talking about Greek goddesses. And so the bizarre Roman inferiority complex about their art as opposed to Greek art, the fact that anything new they do is in fact based on something that came from a civilization that they've conquered, goes on and creates this kind of strange instability, I would say, in the project of Augustan culture. They're constantly having to say, what I'm doing is new, what I'm doing is new, and then in the next breath saying, well, I did this new thing by transforming this old thing.
It's similar, I think, a little bit to the idea of the anxiety of influence by Harold Bloom, who said, ultimately, like, new writers would have this problem of like being influenced and kind of saying the same thing as other writers.
Yeah.
So they kind of try to turn against the old tradition and say, oh, well, they have forgot something, so I'm going to do something that's truly new.
Well, there's an extra dimension in the way Roman poets use Greek stuff, which is that usually the new poet's culture hasn't conquered the old poet's culture. And also there isn't this feeling that the conquering culture is kind of bankrupt in terms of aesthetic sense, and so has to take over all their aesthetics from the other culture. And so there's this kind of almost love-hate relationship that goes on between the Roman poets and their Greek models. And that, I think, is a way of looking at those Roman odes, because Horace, one of the reasons that Horace is saying he's doing something new is that Greek poetry celebrates virtues that wouldn't have conquered the world the way that Rome conquered the world, right? Greek poetry celebrates love. When you get to the tragic stuff, even Plato saw that the tragic heroes weren't really great role models because they were always giving into their suffering. And a Roman would never give into his suffering.
I was really confused because I feel like a number of these odes kind of dealt with love,